Hello and welcome to this edition of Berkshire Now News Magazine. This week we will explore how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting the arts and tourism here in the Berkshires. As you know, almost everything that brings tourists to this area is closed by order of the governor. Tanglewood, Jacob's Pillow, the Norman Rockwell Museum, Berkshire Theater Festival, and Mass MoCA, among many others, are all closed. These venues are the main reason why so many tourists come here. The economic impact of these closures is significant. For example, according to One Berkshire, $1.2 billion was injected into our economy from the arts and tourism in 2017. Only about $917 million was generated by manufacturing and other segments. This means that about 57% of all revenue coming into the Berkshires is generated by the arts and tourism. My guests this week are in a unique position to address the situation. My guests are State Representative Smitty Pignatelli, Director of the Massachusetts Cultural Council, Anita, Director and CEO of the Norman Rockwell Museum, Laurie Norton Moffatt, Director of Mass MoCA, Joseph Thompson, and the Mayor of North Adams, Thomas Bernard. We start with Representative Smitty Pignatelli. I was actually talking last week about how the state is now conducting business. And have they gone to video conferencing at all, or is it still only phone?
Still only phone. There's been some conversations about how we're going to deal with the budget. I mean, normally right now, we'd be preparing in the House side for our annual budget debate in another couple of weeks. So because we're not in session, formal session, and the inability for us to be able to get to the State House to do that, it's become a challenge. I don't think technology is there yet in order for us to get 160 state reps on a call to fairly debate a $42 billion budget. I don't think it's fair for us to, with the inability to lobby or advocate for our districts in that. So I've actually proposed to the leadership to delay the annual budget debate till November. And we can work on a 1/12 budget, which we've done historically in the past, a 1/12 budget starting July 1. We kind of weather this surge that we're going through right now. And then hopefully in the fall, when we're able to be back to work and back to some normalcy in our life, we can then, with safe measures, go back and debate the $42 billion budget for the fiscal year 21. But in the meantime, I think it's grossly unfair to expect that to happen right now, in my opinion.
Now, when you say 1/12, does that mean month by month?
Yeah, it'll be a 1/12 budget, obviously pared down because of the loss of revenue. They had a consensus revenue hearing just the other day between the House and the Senate, done on a Zoom conference. The economists have reduced our revenues nearly $4.5 billion. So that's a major adjustment that we're making with a lot of money going out the door right now to help people in need, unemployment, health insurance, and the whatnot. So we're taking a big hit on revenue. So a 1/12 budget would be a pared down 1/12 version of the previous fiscal year. Pretty much essential services. No bells and whistles, no fluff pieces, no probably specific earmarks for our districts, which we like to always bring back home. I think it's going to be a pared down budget, and I think we'll have a better opportunity, I believe, with people getting back to work, hopefully in June or July. We'll see some better revenue figures come October, November, to have a fair, more equitable debate for this budget. I think otherwise it's going to be too premature and I think unfair to legislators who don't have the ability to actually be there physically to debate and lobby for their pieces of the pie.
Right. And it's not like the federal government where you can print your own money.
They can print their own money. We are constitutionally required to have a balanced budget, which says we have to be really with a fine-tooth comb. It would be nice to be able to spend like the federal government, but there's going to be some long-term consequences of that, the way they're printing out money. And speaking to the federal delegation, they did a major stimulus a few weeks ago, as you know, still waiting for some of the results of that. But they're talking a second, a third, and possibly a fourth stimulus. We're talking now trillions of dollars that it's nice that you can print money, but you still got to pay your bills at the end of the day.
That's right. That's right. And of course, that has the possibility of rearing the ugly head of inflation.
That's right. I mean, we're heading into a recession. I mean, unemployment's at a record high, not only in Massachusetts, but around the country. We're preparing for the surge that we're in the midst of right now as we speak. And I think there's some serious consequences. My phone has been ringing off the hook already this morning. Small business people, people who signed up for unemployment that haven't gotten a return phone call in a few weeks, who have already gone 5 or 6 weeks without a paycheck. I can relate to these people as a former small business owner myself. These are the challenges that people have. And we can say all we want. We can defer property tax, which I think is a good idea. But we also have to keep in mind that cities and towns are hemorrhaging revenues as well. So to defer property tax has a cost implication to the city and town as well, in order for them to pay their level of service of police, fire, and ambulance, essential services. In many ways, I'm kind of glad it's the spring weather, and we're not going into this in the winter months and say, oh my God, we can't even afford to plow our snow or plow our streets. So I think there's some consequences with the loss of revenue, with no hotel motel tax, no meals tax. In some communities that depend on the cannabis industry, there's no local cannabis revenue coming into the communities. So a lot of towns, like the state, are shelling out a lot of money without the ability to recoup those funds. So it's going to be a challenge long term. The administration, I think, has done a good job. I spoke to the lieutenant governor just the other night. And at some point, we're going to have to talk about a serious conversation about a local municipal relief package to help out cities and towns. Otherwise, we're going to be bankrupting some of the communities as well if we're not careful.
I can imagine that would be a real possibility. Yes.
Well, you see what's happening, Bruce, with the Shakespeare and Company has postponed their 2020 season. Berkshire Theater Festival has delayed their opening until August, and I hope that those things will change where that will at least be able to be open. Barrington Stage is playing it by year. Williamstown Theater Festival has gone online, which sounds good. They'll have a season, but they're not going to have the visitors coming in to stay at the hotels, eat in the restaurants, and whatnot. Tanglewood, the Boston Pops, has already canceled their spring season at Tanglewood. Several concerts at Tanglewood are being canceled already, like Ringo Starr and those folks. If Tanglewood ever had a delayed opening or a canceled summer season, that's going to have some devastating long-term effects on our museums and our hotels and our restaurants, and how we operate our municipalities. So I think we have a long road to go. Even if it ended today, we have some long-term consequences that we need to really pay attention to.
Yes, indeed. And you strike an interesting point there, that tourism and our arts, like the Tanglewood and Mass MoCA and the Rockwell Museum, are all an important part of the revenue of Berkshire County. If I know my numbers right, we get about $2 billion a year just in tourism for Berkshire County.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Historically, just in Lenox alone, they take in close to $2 million a year in hotel motel tax. Now, we've never had it broken down by Canyon Ranch versus a hotel, but I look at that number at a 4% local option. That tells me that $45 to $50 million a year is spent on hotel rooms alone in Lenox. So without that happening, now the Canyon Ranch is closed, Cropalo is closed. That's revenue that the town won't have as well. So I think we have some serious implications. Some people love the tourists. I personally love the tourists. I love the change of the seasons and the economy here in the Berkshires. But even statewide, tourism is the third largest industry in Massachusetts. And I would argue with anybody, it's the economic driver of Berkshire County. So we need to embrace that. We need to try to extend those seasons, so it's not just June, July, and August. If we can make it more of a year-round tourist season, but if we lose our peak, we're going to be in serious trouble, and I think we really have to pay attention to that and what our alternative plan is. I always tell the story, Bruce, when I was a kid, we had this place called General Electric in Pittsfield, and they employed 12,000 people. And oh, by the way, we had this thing called Tanglewood that opened on the 4th of July. We used to sit on the wall on Route 183 at Windsor Mountain High School just to watch the traffic. It was just a change from the long winter months. But then I always joke that come Labor Day, we're happy to see them leave. But when General Electric started to scale back, the Southern Berkshires especially shifted its focus towards travel and tourism, culture, and the arts. What's going on at Mass MoCA up in North Adams and the Williams Museums and the Clark Art Institute, Jacob's Pillow, the list goes on and on and on. This is the economic driver that we need to pay attention to. Otherwise, we're going to be in some serious trouble. So I'm always an optimistic person, try to be optimistic as much as we can, but there's a realism here that is going to have some serious consequences if we're not careful. And I think that's why we all have to band together.
Is there any consensus on how those problems should be approached?
Well, there again, now Representative Baird and I, we have filed a nonprofit cultural relief package. We did the same for hospitality. We need to provide hospitality and the cultures some relief. Much like we're trying to help people with unemployment, we're helping people with the small business loans. I think money's cheap in relatively terms. The Feds lower the rate to almost zero, so money is cheap. I think the banks have done a fantastic job really stepping up in a good way. I know in particular Adams Community Bank has really shelled out a lot of money, donating to the hospital, helping small businesses, helping them shepherd through the bureaucracies of the federal and the state small business loan program. But I think we need to do more of that. And especially since it's going to be a long-term issue, we can't be thinking it's going to all be resolved in a month. We have to, I always say it's a marathon, not a sprint. This is a great indication that this is a marathon. It's not any short-term solutions we're going to have. It's going to be short-term gain, but long-term pain if we're not careful with how we approach it. And I think by coming together, I think the United Way has stepped up, the banks have stepped up, business community has stepped up. There's even businesses that are, keeping their employees intact, even though there's no business. I admire that, but how much longer can you do that and be realistic? So I think we have a lot of issues to deal with. And I say again, sticking together, working together, and I've used the hashtag #BeBerkshire. These are the times that the Berkshires shine when times are struggling, and I think we'll be doing that again this time.
Are you aware of any activity on a federal scale that is helping to address this nationwide?
Well, other than the stimulus that they've already done, and people are still waiting for their $1,200 checks or whatever they got coming their way. Some businesses who got in early on the SBA programs have already received their checks. I talked to a local business just the other day. She was ecstatic. The money was deposited in her account on Friday. So I think the money is starting to roll out for businesses. I think we need to do a much better job with individuals. I think that the unemployment process is a challenge, and it should be much more efficient, much more simple, I think, in order to sign up during these emergency times. When I talk to people that are waiting 5 weeks just to get a return phone call from unemployment, that's wrong. That's just flat out wrong. I've told this to the administration. They have actually ramped up their call center. They are returning over 6,000 calls per day, 7 days a week. So I think we're starting to finally see some movement on that. But, you calling me is one thing. I need the check. I need the money to pay my rent, to pay my mortgage, to buy my groceries, to take care of my family. And I think that's what's been slow to evolve, but it's starting to ramp up. But I think the federal government has recognized that what they've done so far is not enough. It's the start. But how much more they're going to be able to do is going to be a challenge. I think, they've deferred student loans, which, my daughter has student debt from college a couple of years ago, so they've deferred those to the fall. That's actually money in your pocket, but we can't take advantage of the opportunity to say, yeah, but I still owe the money. It's not like I'm waiving those dollars. I still owe the money, just not today. It's next month.
Right. Challenging times, to be sure.
Yeah, challenging times, but in this home quarantine is a challenge. I mean, God bless the healthcare workers and those grocery store people and the first responders. I mean, my God.
Indeed.
They've done yeoman's work, and they are the heroes of today. They are the 9/11 heroes of COVID-19, and I think
they sure are.
But when we have a shortage of PPE, that personal protective equipment, in this country, I think a lot of good's going to come out of this. At the end of the day, we have talked for years about telemedicine. We're starting to do telemedicine, so you can be at home talking to your doctor like you and I are talking right now. We've advocated for that for years. Well, that's happening right now. When this is all done, that should stay intact. That's going to save loads of money for individuals and people out here, especially who don't have transportation modes to get back and forth to a doctor, or in the middle of winter, I can talk to my doctor over a Zoom call. Telemedicine, I think, is going to be one of those things. Distance learning, I think the K through 12 are trying to step up here a little bit. Our institutions of higher learning are doing that as well. But I told the Lieutenant Governor the other day that, it's great that K through 12 is trying to do some online learning. But if you live in my district, in Sandusfield and Monterey and New Marlboro, or live up north in Peru or Florida or Clarksburg with no broadband, that doesn't help the student at all. So I think we need to really recognize some of the things we need to accelerate. I think the investment in broadband, we're getting close to completing this, but reliability, efficiency, and affordability are going to be the factors going forward. But I had an email last night from someone from North Berkshire asking me what would happen if MCLA or Williams College don't bring their kids back in the fall. That's going to have huge economic implications for Northern Berkshire County. So I think we need to keep a lot of these things in mind, and while we can be much more efficient than what we've done historically, we have to realize the economic impacts, good and bad, of the decisions we're making today.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Well, that's it for my questions for you, Smitty. Thank you so much for your participation today. I'm
happy to help anytime, Bruce. I appreciate what you're doing, and I just encourage people to stay smart, use common sense, stay healthy, stay home as much as you possibly can. Let's be Berkshire.
Let's be Berkshire. And what's the hashtag again?
Hashtag be Berkshire.
Hashtag be Berkshire.
Yeah.
Again, Smitty, thank you so much. You have a good day. Stay safe and stay strong.
Stay healthy. Thank you so much.
My next guest is the director of the Massachusetts Cultural Council, Anita Walker. Little known fact is that this council has provided more funding to more organizations than any other state. They provide not only funding, but technical assistance as well. Anita, thank you for joining us today. Anita is the executive director of the Massachusetts Cultural Council and has been there, I believe, for 13 years or so.
Yeah. Exactly.
And Anita, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, I think our viewers are going to be most interested in, is the cultural impact in Berkshire County. Because, for example, in 2017, about $1.2 billion of all the county revenue came from tourism and cultural activities versus about $900 million from everything else. And so the cultural activities in Berkshire County really help us get things done like snow plowing and plumbing for water systems and sewer systems and stuff of that nature. And obviously with the COVID virus epidemic, that we're in serious trouble with revenue coming into Berkshire County. And so one of the things I wanted to know about is, on a state level, what is being done to help cultural organizations throughout the state, but in particular, Berkshire County?
Bruce, thank you very much for that question. And I really appreciate the fact that you look at the cultural economy and the impact that cultural organizations and cultural activity has in Berkshire County beyond just the economic inputs and outputs of the organizations themselves, because they are part and parcel of an entire economic system. When you have an anchor institution, whether it's Mass MoCA or the Clark or a Berkshire Theater Group, it's it's not only bringing money into the community, into that organization, but it is helping to support small businesses all around it, restaurants and hotels. Our cultural organizations are part of the third largest industry in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and no one knows that better than the Berkshires. And that industry is tourism. We love tourist dollars. We love New York money. We love money that comes into Massachusetts from another state, because that's better than money that we just sort of reorganize and move around within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So when we look at the impact on cultural organizations of the coronavirus, first of all, it is unprecedented and devastating to our organizations, but beyond that, it's also devastating to our communities and all those small businesses that are part of that ecology, that business ecology that surrounds the cultural organizations. We've gone through recessions before, as you well know, as recently as probably the last most recent devastating one was probably in 2007, 2008. But in a recession, you can kind of see it coming. You sort of start to feel the downward trend, and there is an opportunity to sort of batten down the hatches and prepare yourself and make some cuts and edits to your organization. This was different in that it was a cliff. One day our organizations were planning their summer seasons and had productions underway and had sold tickets for concerts and plays and so forth. And the next day the doors were slammed shut. And there was no way really to prepare for this. Nobody saw this coming.
Right.
In the last, just since the coronavirus really had the impact here in Massachusetts, we've measured more than $250 million in lost revenue to our organizations in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We are periodically running little dipstick surveys of the field to collect this information. The most recent wrapped up just last week. We've had nearly 700 organizations respond to our survey, and $264 million so far accounted for being lost. And just since the survey, every single day, obviously we know it's a downward trend. And more than 15,000 jobs in the cultural sector have been affected by this. Furloughs, layoffs, a reduction in hours. These are real people with real jobs in our communities. And we are just focusing on and counting our cultural organizations. Beyond that, it's the restaurants and the shops and the retail and the hotels and the motels and so forth that are also closed, and that there will be some time before visitors and tourists feel confident to become part of the cultural and creative economy again, even after this passes.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation, isn't it? And is there any activity within the state government to address this further down the line? I know it's difficult to do things when you don't even know what your budget's going to be to do it, but is there anything hopeful happening down the line?
Well, you talk about visibility, and I think, the ability to plan is hampered when you're doing it in the fog, and that's what I think we all feel like. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what sort of the re-entry or the unlocking is going to look like over what period of time. What we've done at the Mass Cultural Council, of course, first and foremost is we're collecting data. We're sort of trying to measure the impact so that we can do the best job of case making that we can in terms of helping our field. Immediately after the shutdown, essentially, we've launched 2 COVID relief programs. The first was aimed at our organizations that we serve and support here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We call that Safe Harbors. The reason we call it that is that we know that everybody has to sort of batten down the hatches. We're in a storm, and so what we want to do is just put ourselves in a safe harbor until the storm passes so that we're in a position to open up and become sustainable moving forward. So that program was really twofold. First and foremost was a full-on assault of technical assistance, as I like to call it. We did a series of webinars in partnership with Nonprofit Finance Fund. We had more than 400 organizations participate in these webinars. More than 1,000 individuals participated, and they were really focused on, number 1, assessing your financial position now. Number 2, creating scenarios over what our options are to do. Number 3, how do we decide? as a cultural leader, as a board member, what is the best option to take, how to communicate your financial position, and importantly, and this was actually one of the first things we did because of the time pressure, how our organizations can successfully apply for funding through the CARES Act, the federal stimulus program. So we trained our organizations on how to fill out those applications so that they could have an opportunity to access some fairly significant funds that were becoming available through the Small Business Administration. Now, as everybody knows, those significant funds ran out in short order. And I understand today there's probably going to be a vote in Congress to replenish those funds. So we're hoping that that will help some of our organizations sort of buy time to make it through this crisis. The second thing we did for our organizations is we're doing just straight out flat grants of $2,250. We know it's not a lot, but we support hundreds of organizations across the Commonwealth. It's a little bit. We were able to access funds that we had on hand through the Casino Gaming Mitigation Program that was directed by statute to help in the sustainability of our organizations. So we had some money there that we were planning to use for a different purpose, which sort of is slowed down significantly because of the coronavirus. So we didn't want the money to sit around. We want to put every dollar we can out to our organizations to help them through this very difficult time. So there was grant making and there was the technical assistance. Also, we know that the other very, very hard hit group of people here in Massachusetts are independent contractors, individual artists, gig workers. Until actually, I think just this week, the good news is that they are now eligible to apply for unemployment benefits. That's new. And that was a huge relief, I know, for a lot of our independent contractors and people who work job to jobs, especially in the cultural sector. But here are individuals who came out of the winter, which is typically lean if you're a musician who's playing gigs or an individual artist. And the springtime is where you sort of replenish your funds. This is where you get a lot of activity. This is where you sort of build your business back up. They came out of the winter, and again, doors absolutely slammed shut. So we're doing flat $1,000 grants to individual artists and cultural workers. The application just closed yesterday. We have 275 of those available, and we have nearly 2,000 applications. So we're keeping our list intact. We're continuing to try to access resources from other funders. New England Foundation for the Arts contributed to our fund, and we're hoping as other funders find out about this incredible need in the cultural sector that they'll step up and we'll be able to continue to do some more grant making here. But as of now, we have 275 grants available, and we'll be distributing those in the next week or so.
My goodness, that's a lot of preparation and almost instantaneous repurposing your entire organization, isn't it?
Well, you know, it's an emergency. And the good news is, and it is interesting that you say that. I think that the reason we were able to react so quickly is because, first of all, we have a top-notch team at the Mass Cultural Council, and we work very closely every single day with our constituents. We see ourselves as a service organization as much or more than as a grant maker, even though grant making is probably what we're more known for. And so our team is acutely aware of the financial challenges every single day that our organizations face. We're working with our organizations year in and year out on how to stabilize their budgets, how to get a balance sheet in the black, how to capitalize socially and financially and intellectually their organizations so that they can be sustainable. This is something we're always focused on. So this was actually for us just a bit of a pivot to focus on this emergency, since we're working with our organizations on difficult financial issues every single day. Let's face it, nonprofit cultural organizations they're kind of a unique business model. They make a product and they sell it for less than it costs to make. You're a businessman. That's probably not the model that you would raise your hand and say you're going to design a business around. But that is the way our business models work. So there's in no cases there are a lot of cushion. There are not huge reserves. We work with our organization so they have these emergency reserves, and in a certain percentage of organizations we have them, but it's not typical, let's face it. These are passion-driven organizations that contribute an enormous amount to our communities in terms of the economy, in terms of augmenting a top-notch education by having creativity injected into the curriculum. And I think more than ever, and this is another thing that is of acute concern of ours, our organizations, our superpower is really community building. It's increasing well-being. People who participate in the arts and culture are documented to be healthier than people who don't participate in the arts and culture. And we are the best antidote to the thing that is now a requirement, and that is social isolation. And we know that social isolation and loneliness lead to other health consequences, depression, even heart disease. Loneliness is more consequential to your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we're now all under sequestration in order to combat the coronavirus. But coming out the other end of this, it's the arts and culture that are really going to help reduce the anxiety, bring people back into a sense of optimism and confidence and well-being, and everybody deserves to have that. So the economy is one big part, and we talk a lot about it, but the vitality of our cultural organizations to bring our communities back together and bring individual health back into our own sense of well-being, we're going to be counting on our cultural organizations for that.
I agree. And that's why a lot of people come to the Berkshires. You know, it's not just a beautiful mountainous place, but there's some wonderful cultural activities going around here pretty much all year round.
Absolutely. And I know for myself, when I get the opportunity and I try to make as many as I possibly can to go out to the Berkshires, there is just something. I mean, the Berkshires are really sort of the quintessential of this thing we call a sense of place. When you're there, you know where you are. You know you're someplace special. And it is sort of the physical environment. It is beautiful. There's no question about that. But I can't think of the Berkshires without hearing the music, without thinking about Norman Rockwell, without thinking of the excitement and the grittiness of Mass MoCA, without the incredible high-quality theater and dance that you have. There's no part of the cultural disciplines that aren't represented in a top-notch way out in the Berkshires. And obviously, the sadness and grief, quite frankly, that we all feel when we see Jacob's Pillow for the first time in 100 years, not doing a season this year. When we see Williamstown Theater Festival not doing a season this year. I mean, that is part and parcel of the definition of summer in the Berkshires. So it's painful. It's a real loss, I think, for everybody who looks forward to that and participates in it. But I do want to make one point, and that is that we have to remember that our field is incredibly resilient. I mean, artists will make art, dancers will dance, musicians will make music. You can't stop them. And that will happen. It may, moving forward, be presented in a different way, in a different context, in a different kind of setting and environment. But already we're seeing and hearing from our colleagues in the cultural sector of how, as Mandy Greenfield at Williamstown Theater Festival put it to me in a conversation we had last week, she said, you know what? I'm not going to let the universe tell me I can't make theater. And so she's partnering with Audible, actually, to put one of their shows out to the public this year. And I do think that that's the way a lot of our sector feels. They're going to find a way. Now, one of the ways that everybody is finding is through the use of technology, like the conversation we're having right now. So musicians are putting their concerts out over the internet, and teachers, artistic teachers, art teachers, and our cultural teachers are doing their lessons and they're teaching over the internet, which is great, and that's great for access. But nobody's quite, you're a businessman, this is where we could use your help. No one's quite figured out how to monetize that. No one's quite, what we've done is we've taken a product that we spend more to make than we get back for selling. And now we're just plain giving it away for free. So at the end of the day, that doesn't pay the rent and that doesn't buy the groceries. So we're going to have to figure out what that business model is so that when we take advantage of what we're learning through technology and access and delivery, that there's still a way to resource that work. I'm also thinking about sort of the gradual and incremental reopening of our cultural organizations. And then probably one of the last will be places where a lot of people assemble, like in theaters and concert halls and so forth. So I can imagine that there might be sort of well, you can fill half the house and have people sit a certain distance apart. But it costs the same to put the show on for half the audience as it does for a full house. We're going to produce half a play or present half an orchestra. So how are we going to navigate those financial realities with the reality of bringing people back into our theaters and halls?
Yes, I was talking with somebody the other day. We were talking about the 4th of July parade. And if you fold social distancing into the 4th of July parade, it then becomes the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th of July parade.
That's a good way to put it. That's exactly, which, maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing, but.
Well, very good. Anita, thank you so much for your time today. You've been a wealth of information, and I'm sure that will be very interesting to our viewers out here in the Berkshires. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks for all you're doing.
The two previous guests help us understand how our state government is working on the problem. Now let's see how it is being tackled by some of the venues. Laurie Norton Moffatt is the Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge. Laurie, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about the Norman Rockwell Museum under normal circumstances and then kind of contrast that to what's going on now?
Thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here with you on your show. Norman Rockwell Museum is in our 50th year of business, and during that time, we have been open to the public 362 days a year, all year round, both in Stockbridge on our beautiful 36-acre campus with our 10 galleries and extensive collections, as well as traveling exhibitions of our artworks around the world. So the contrast of when we closed the museum 5 weeks ago and absolutely shuttered the doors so that we could keep everyone healthy during this COVID-19 crisis has put the museum in a very new and interesting and challenging position for us. With the closing of the doors and no visitors coming, it means that all of our earned revenue, which is a significant portion of our business model, we can talk about that more, is closed. So we've pivoted and have been presenting our programs virtually. We have a very active digital learning arm of the museum that has long provided all of our education curricula, our lectures, our guided tours, all of the content that we create for our visitors to experience within the museum. We also publish on our website and on our social media channels. And so this is what we've been concentrating on right now, is to create learning experiences for students who are home, learning at home, for their parents to use, for teachers to use, to create a unified classroom setting while they're teaching remotely, and also just for pleasure for people who might be experiencing isolation at home and not being able to get out. So we've been using our art to bring it to people's lives in very meaningful ways.
Is there a website that they could go to access that? And is there a fee for it?
All of these materials are available for free, and they are available on the museum's website. It's our museum initials, nrm.org.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'll have to look into that. That sounds great.
In fact, to Friday evening this week, I'm not sure of the timing and the airing of your program, but on April 25th, we have our high school radio program, which was to have been a live performance back in March, is going to be aired virtually, and it will be a whole radio program written by high school students in the region to talk about the current exhibition that's on view in our closed galleries, Finding Home, which are 4 artists' immigration stories. These exhibits are also online on the museum's website, and the students will be reading a radio performance that they wrote about this exhibition and the idea of finding your home, whether it's from an immigration experience or as we're all experiencing our homes anew right now while we're spending so much time at home, both working and managing our home lives.
And will that program be available as a podcast for later listening?
Yes, absolutely. It will. All of these programs live on the museum's website as well as our YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com and search for Norman Rockwell Museum, you'll find hundreds of talks and lectures and programs that we've presented, and the radio program will appear there. And we will have live links to it on our social media platforms as well, but it will live on after its first initial airing tomorrow evening.
Yes, because this program will air after the 25th of April.
Yes, so my recommendation is to go to the museum's website, and the idea is people can experience our virtual museum 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from anywhere around the world. So it's very accessible. And we're also on the Google Art Project in our Norman Rockwell Museum channel there for some of our exhibitions, which is another way to enjoy and experience the museum's art offerings right now.
Wow, it sounds like you have some pretty good alternative programs in place.
Well, I think what we're also experiencing is we're finding that right now this is our primary programming when the doors to the galleries are closed. And so it's presented an opportunity for us to build out the investments we've made in past years to the digital collections and to our digital learning experiences, so that now this really is a primary way to enjoy the museum. We also have art classes, learning to draw. We have a exhibition online, an invitation to draw your home, draw what home is for you right now, and you can submit that online, and we'll put your artwork in the online exhibition so that we can hopefully present home life from all over the world, all over the United States. So we really are offering a number of creative ways that people can experience the museum and also bring art into their lives, because I think art can be such a comfort at a time right like now when people have so many worries about loved ones, about their health, about their finances, their jobs, how to keep a business going. And if we can bring a small bit of pleasure into people's lives to help manage stress and just give hope that there's a better day ahead. This is something that Norman Rockwell did so well during his lifetime, really during other very challenging times in our nation's history, such as the Great Depression a century ago, and World War II, and the strife during our civil rights movement. I think Norman Rockwell was able to lift us up, lift our spirits up, and find the hope in the future of our human resilience. And we hope the museum's offerings give a bit of that to people at this time.
I'm sure they do. Have you been able to track the viewership on, for example, YouTube now versus before you closed the doors?
Yes, we are able to do that, Bruce. And what I'm told from the data that our team manages and reviews is some of our viewership is up about 5-fold on different channels. So we know people are experiencing these offerings, and the more we can get the word out about them and people know that they can tune in at any time, they don't have to find a specific time of day to do it. We just invite everybody to enjoy and take advantage of it.
Oh, that's terrific. Now, there's talk about starting the economy up again, and who knows when that will really start. It could be months away, or some governors want to make it days away, it seems. But planning for that must be an issue for you too. It must be something that you're looking at almost on a daily basis, because you need to get prepared for that, right?
We do, Bruce, and we are very much looking at how do we think about reopening. Of course, we will not be hasty to reopen. We'll be following the governor's guidelines and the official health department guidelines, particularly for Massachusetts, and but the Berkshires being sandwiched between New York and Boston. We're very conscious of the challenges in those two major cities, and with deep appreciation for how our governors of both Massachusetts and New York are managing this crisis. But as we think about what it will mean to gather, to be able to come together in society in the way we used to take for granted, we're thinking about things like how many visitors can safely be in the galleries together. What's the idea of having more distance between us when we're at a cultural event? This is something that I think museums have an opportunity to do. It's a little more challenging in a performing arts setting where everybody's sitting in auditorium seating and in a theater very close together. So I hope museums can model how to begin to reopen. Of course, all of the sanitation and cleaning that goes on now in banks and grocery stores and drugstores, and that kind of awareness will also be heightened. I think there will be ways to help include the digital experiences. So perhaps instead of an audio tour in person, a guided tour in a group, you might hear it on your own cell phone with fresh earpieces that we could provide. These are the things we're looking at so that we can begin to reopen and do so safely. And then we'll learn from our visitor experiences, and we'll learn really what the public appetite is to get back out and gather. Some of the early preliminary survey information we're hearing is people are really eager for experiences where they can relax, where they can be uplifted, where they can safely be with their families, but get out in the fresh air. One of the wonderful aspects of Norman Rockwell Museum is we have a beautiful grounds, a park-like grounds of 36 acres with wide open paths and walkways, beautiful trees, a nice walk down along the river. So already we know people have been enjoying the landscape, and as spring blossoms so beautifully and slowly here in the Berkshires, the site gets more beautiful every day, and we think that people will be able to enjoy that in the weeks ahead when it's safe to gather. And that will be something that all summer long people can picnic. It's possible our museum terrace can spread out and people can enjoy their lunches on the lawns and keep distanced. And so I think there are a lot of ways we will be able to invite people to enjoy the museum in a safe way and in an uplifting way that we're all surely going to need so very much.
That's wonderful. I hope that comes sooner rather than later. Another question I have for you is, what kind of assistance are you getting with any of this through the Massachusetts Cultural Commission?
Thank you, Bruce. I think for all businesses that have been closed as a result of the pandemic, it's a time of great economic hardship, from small family businesses to the hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, anyone who's been in the business of gathering people together for enjoyment and pleasure have closed their doors, and that's very true for the cultural sector. So as a result of no earned revenue coming in, we at Norman Rockwell Museum have been immensely grateful to our donors, our longtime members and patrons who have stepped up to give a little extra right now to help keep our core services out there in the community, the virtual museum that I mentioned. We did have to take the very hard and sad decision to furlough for the time being about 2/3 of the museum staff while we just navigate through this time. So we're very grateful to organizations like the Massachusetts Cultural Council, certainly our elected officials who have pressed for support from the federal government for the not-for-profit community and cultural community. So from the CARES Act of the Small Business Administration, payroll protection plan loans, to granting agencies with the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities, to our state organizations, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, which has just always been so extraordinary under Anita Walker's leadership. I know an emergency fund was made available for artists, for example, who are generally self-employed individuals and without being able to hire them right now to lead our workshops and perform on our stages, and our musicians and dancers. This is a pool of support for the people who provide primary artistic experience. And we need to look at issues as well of the underlying unemployment insurance and things that are costly to nonprofits while we're in a closed mode and while we've had to suspend employment for so many people in order to survive and come through this time. So I have to say it's been just enormously gratifying to see the support that people have come through, not only for Norman Rockwell Museum, but the leadership of our elected officials to recognize that this sector drives the economy in Berkshire County, and that in turn supports the hospitality and the tourism, and also an immense quality of life and education, artistic experiences for people. So everybody's doing their part to help us sort of ride the tide through this and be able to reopen our doors. And we're so sensitive that so many businesses are in this very same position of having their doors closed, having no customers or revenue, and there's a wide swath of the economy that's been so deeply impacted. But I also know that we can help restart that economy as soon as it is safe to reopen and it is safe for visitors to return to the Berkshires, to take part in all of the hospitality, the food culture, the environment, all of the wonderful amenities the Berkshires has to offer. So I'm hopeful that while I expect we'll have a slow restart of the economy, because we want to have a careful restart, we want a safe restart, because people's health must absolutely come first, that we will be here and be one of the engines that will help get the economy moving again.
Wonderful news. And I appreciate your time today, Laurie. It's been very interesting and informative. And I wish you well, and I look forward to visiting the museum once again when you open. Thank you so much.
We look forward to welcoming everyone back. Thank you, and be well.
And stay safe. Next up is the director of Mass MoCA in North Adams, Joseph Thompson. Mass MoCA is the largest contemporary art museum in the United States. Joe Thompson, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Good to be here.
It's good to see you. Can you tell us a little bit about what Mass MoCA is, maybe some of its history, and then from there go into the present situation?
Sure. Well, first, Mass MoCA stands for the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, but that's a misnomer. We're far more than a museum. We are a museum, for sure. We have about 250,000 square feet of galleries devoted to new art, which is often fabricated here, working directly with artists. But besides that, we're also a performing arts venue. I think people who live here in the Berkshires know that this is a place where you can come watch films, see dance performances, theater, concerts, multi-day, multi-venue music festivals. And indeed, the performing arts program really takes up about half of everything we've got. Our people, our financial resources, our emotional bandwidth. We're really as much devoted to new performing arts as we are to new visual art. But it's even a little more complicated than that, because we're also a commercial real estate operator. One of the ways we hold house and home together is rent some of our surplus space, about 125,000 square feet, to some 38 tenants. And they range from restaurants and cafes to law firms and health professionals and the Social Security office, book publishing companies. There's a wide range of commercial and public service activities that go on here. The rent that they pay goes to help support the art program and education program at Mass MoCA. So we really are a three-legged stool: commercial real estate development, performing arts, and visual arts. We've been open for coming up 21 years in May, and we occupy this beautiful historic site that was formerly occupied by Sprague Electric. We're the third tenant here, however. This factory campus, which is some 26 buildings and on 16 acres, it occupies about 1/3 of the downtown business district of North Adams. It was built by Arnold Printworks. So this great facility has gone from manufacturing printed cotton textiles to high-tech electronics and capacitors to art. And if you follow that arc, it pretty much describes the industrialization and then post-industrialization of all of Berkshire County. If you think about it, we went from making real things, cloth that you put on your back, to electronic components, high-tech capacitors, in which the value that gets created is as much in the intellectual property and the engineering that goes into the work, to our product, which is pure art and performance. The product that people leave here when they walk out the door is, we hope, a new thought in their head or a smile on their face, but not a tangible product. Well, we sell a few books and catalogs, and people will have a cup of coffee every now and then.
Wonderful. And how does that compare to what's happening now? I mean, obviously you've had to close your doors for a while, but tell me a little bit about the effects of that and how you're coping with that, and how you're solving issues.
Sure. Well, obviously the aftermath of the COVID-19 lockdown has been really dramatic and indeed brutal on this institution. We've grown an audience over the years. When we first opened, 50, 60,000 people a year would come. But over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, the numbers have really begun to grow a lot. We're 200 or even 300,000 people a year come through the doors, which of course creates a very big effect, economic effect and socioeconomic effect. All those visitors who come, they stay in hotels. It's generated a lot of new hotel building activity. There are restaurants that have opened, and I believe the Ford Foundation and Williams College estimate that about $50 or $52 million a year of economic activity that happens in North Adams and the surrounding region stems from the activities of Mass MoCA. So we've gradually grown into a pretty powerful economic stimulus in the town. We're not rich though, and we're still pretty new. Two decades is not a very long time for an art museum. We're lucky to have raised a little bit of an endowment, which is like a savings account for cultural institutions, and typically you draw a little bit of money from interest earned on that account to help underwrite your operations. But frankly, if we didn't have that small endowment, we would be in real trouble right now, because Mass MoCA, unlike a lot of wealthy institutions that draw heavily on their endowment, we are reliant for about 70% of our operating budget comes from earned income, from ticket sales and concessions and things like that. Well, all that went to zero almost overnight, forcing us to take some really tough measures. We had to lay off a lot of our colleagues, I think 122 out of 165. So we really like tucked and rolled. We tried to limit our cash out as quickly and as dramatically as we could. We're fundraising and doing everything we can to pay the bills so that we can reopen. We will reopen. There's no doubt about that. We'll probably open in a slightly different format than we did, and who knows how long it will take to rebuild that audience. I don't think you just open the door and expect the same flow of hundreds of thousands of people to come back in day one. So what we're spending our time on right now is a lot of planning, fundraising, contingency planning on the sort of how we'll open up. And of course, that's all based on when it will be, and nobody knows that for sure. But there's a plan A if we can start to open our galleries again sometime in early summer. There's a plan B if that drags out to the end of the summer or the fall. There's a plan C, which looks hard with steely banker's eyes and foresees a world in which maybe things like our performing arts won't open for even a year or so. Who knows? But we're trying to put plans in place that are both optimistic and put us in a position to be ready to open at just as soon as we can. But we're also trying to be financially prudent and realistic and save every dollar that we can so that we're around to reopen again. In the meantime, of course, it's not as if this campus has nothing going on. As I mentioned, we had 38 tenants, some of whom are still open. We've got a couple of food and beverage. There's Bright Ideas, AOK, Tunnel City Coffee. They're still here working. We have some essential governmental services, the court, the Social Security office, things that have to be open. There are a lot of professional health and mental health professionals that are here that are still providing services. So even though the museum has closed, we're still running a fairly large, complex campus that has activity on it. So that it makes it even more complicated.
Oh, I can imagine. Now, you mentioned your endowment. Most museums have an endowment of 10 to 15% or 10 to 15 times their annual income. Is that close to what you have, or?
Thank you, Bruce. You're a scholar of not-for-profit institutions. You're correct. That well endowed institutions that have been around for a while and have gradually saved up those big endowments and been lucky to have wealthy people make large contributions to them. Often have numbers, you cite them correctly, it can be 5 or 10 or 15 times the annual operations, which means you could survive something like this for quite a long time. We started our endowment in 2007, 2008, and we've been gradually building it up, and we had it up to about, roughly 2 times, a little under 2 times our annual operating support. And I hope that we get out of this with, 1.5 times our annual operating support. Our board authorized our staff to tap that endowment up to a certain amount to cover emergency funds. It's something you really don't want to do except in emergency situations. So we have that as a backstop, but at the same time, we're out with 10 cups and the best pitches that we can make, trying to raise emergency operating funds. Obviously, it's a very difficult time to raise money because everybody's feeling the pinch. People from all walks of life are feeling the pressure of this. The uncertainty that's cast by the unknown timeline means that people are protective of their hard-won assets. So, but nevertheless, we have to do it. So it's even though it's a tough time to ask people for money, that's what I spend a lot of my days doing now.
Yeah, I can understand. Now, I was talking with the people over at the Norman Rockwell Museum, and they've put a lot of their stuff online. Is there anything online available for Mass MoCA?
We have some. Because we have a wide-ranging kind of roster of things that go on here, performances and music and visual arts. We've been posting 3 times a day something that we've called art breaks. They're just little snippets of archival material, images from the galleries, virtual walkthroughs, snippets of musical concerts that are happening here, essentially to remind people about what this place was and what it meant to them, and remind them of certain pieces of art or performances that they may have seen here. As this drags on a little while, we're beginning to gear up and think about new programming that we could do. Frankly, it's not our strength. Our strength is bringing real live human beings to see real live art right before their eyes. And as I've said a couple of times, we are in the gathering business. Our job is to bring lots of people together around acts of creativity. And we're very focused on attracting people, and particularly destination visitors to the region. We want a lot of people to come. We want a lot of people to stay longer because we know that every one of our visitors that spends the night leaves behind money and resources. And Mass MoCA is a kind of a strange institution. We were founded with 2 missions. One is to present the best contemporary art of all kinds across all media to the public, but secondly, to use that as a lever, as a fulcrum for generating socioeconomic gains in our region. When Mass MoCA was proposed, the unemployment in North Adams was pushing 20%. It's made a lot of progress over the last 20 years. It's a far more diversified place. There are younger people, creative souls who are moving in. There's there was a time, I remember 25 years ago, if people were going out to eat from Williamstown, they wouldn't. I mean, North Adams wouldn't cross their mind as a place to go. Now it's very fluid interaction between North Adams and Pittsfield and Williamstown. People come from down from Vermont. There's just a movement of people, and a softening of those old lines that used to separate North Adams from the rest of the community. So we feel like the town is it's something of a renaissance. It's been well reported that North Adams has come a long ways in particularly the last 5 and 10 years. So we're very anxious to get open again. We understand the role that this institution plays in the long-term life of the community and cannot wait to get the doors open. We know it's going to be different. We know that we're going to have to take all kinds of extraordinary measures. But if you think about it, museums are places where people come and they're routinely told to stand back. Museums are a place where people are used to being told not to touch. Museums are places that have lots of space, particularly Mass MoCA, where we've got our social distancing space comes by the acre here. So we feel like at the right time and with the right precautions, masks and all the social distancing techniques that we're all quickly learning, that places like Mass MoCA can be a place that people can come and be together, but not too close. I believe that very quickly, people have done a really great job with social distancing, but we're going to need places to go where our lives are going to have to be fuller than they have been the last month or 6 weeks or so. And I truly believe that museums are a place where that can happen responsibly, safely, in a thoughtful, interesting environment that will give people other things to think about. So I think we have definitely a role to play in the next phase, whenever that comes.
Right. One last question, Joe. What kind of assistance have you received from the state and the federal government, if any?
Oh, good question. Like many of our sister organizations, Mass MoCA applied for the payroll protection plan funding, and we received a nice loan. That's part of it will be a forgivable loan, so it's a loan grant that, and we just got word of that this last week. So we'll beginning with a little bit of an interim ramp up with the proceeds of that grant loan. And we're deeply appreciative of our friends at Mountain One for helping get that done for us. I've also been following closely Representative Pignatelli and Representative Barrett, formerly Mayor John Barrett, have introduced a piece of legislation that would provide something like $75 million of emergency kind of re-ramping money that would go through the Mass Cultural Council. You spoke to Anita Walker. And that would allow them to essentially re-grant those monies to institutions to cover the cost of getting back open. The PPP money is good for, obviously, fantastic for staff. It allows us to bring people back, but there are going to be a lot of costs of situating our institutions for this new way of working. You know, touchless doors, advanced ticketing where you buy them online and so you don't have to go through the normal transactions. Probably, you know, social distancing officers and things like that that are not going to be inexpensive. So there's staffing costs, capital expenditure costs, a lot of costs that are going to come with trying to figure out how to operate these precious cultural institutions in this next phase until a vaccine comes along. And the Pignatelli-Barrett bill, as I understand it, is meant to provide that kind of funding that goes right to the institution to help us be prepared for the reopening whenever that comes.
Wonderful. Well, Joe, thank you so much. It's been a delight having you on our program. We wish you well, and I can't wait to get back to Mass MoCA.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing this and to your other interview with the other Joseph C. Thompson.
It is obvious that the futures of Norman Rockwell Museum and Mass MoCA are in very competent leadership hands. We wish them well with their reopening efforts when that finally is allowed and safe to do. To wrap things up, we turn to the Mayor of North Adams, Thomas Bernard. Mayor Bernard, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Bruce.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of North Adams and kind of how Mass MoCA has had an impact up until now, and then what's happening now?
Sure. I think the history of Mass MoCA really points or is part of the history in a critical way. So North Adams is a place that, if you go back to when the valley was settled, is a place that has been defined by innovation and creativity and change. So when it was the river and water power fueling things, the complex where Mass MoCA sits right now was a textile center. And when the textile market changed and we were looking for a way to reinvent ourselves, it was electronics manufacturing that became, the main industry in North Adams, as it has become in a lot of places in the Berkshires. And I think, when you look at both of those trends before you even get to Mass MoCA, they either fueled or created opportunities for innovation. So needing to ship textiles was one of the reasons that the Hoosick Tunnel exists, and it was in its day an engineering marvel. The components that came out of Sprague Electric Company were responsible for helping to put people on the moon, and also were part of this control systems for the first atomic bombs. Not necessarily a pride point, but it certainly was an innovation that was tied to global history. So when the electronics manufacturing started to change, when that market changed in the 70s and 80s, and we as a community were looking for what the next innovation and the next creative resource for North Adams and for that space was, it was art and culture, and art and culture that in a lot of places is made on that campus. So art that's fabricated, performing arts that are created right here in North Adams that travel to museums and stages across the world, because we continue to be an innovator just in a new space. And so it's really kind of baked into the DNA and into the resilient spirit of North Adams and the Northern Berkshires.
And now that we're in this coronavirus pandemic situation, kind of contrast how things kind of look now and what systems you're putting in place to counteract that.
Sure. Well, I want to give credit to Joe Thompson at Mass MoCA for making some really tough decisions with the support of the MoCA board. Full disclosure, I used to work at Mass MoCA. That's part of my resume. So I know a lot of the folks there, and I know how hard it was to make that decision and how it was about making sure that they would be ready for the recovery. I want to give credit as we're talking about systems and supports to what Rep Smitty Pignatelli and Rep John Barrett have done in terms of filing legislation to support cultural institutions and to support the cultural sector. Locally, we know that this is going to be a knock not just for Mass MoCA's finances, but for the city's finances, for those parts of our budget that are driven by hotel and occupancy taxes and meals taxes and the things that visitors help to contribute to not just our economy because of Mass MoCA, but because of tourists, because of the Williamstown Theater Festival, because of WICMA and the Clark and everything that happens up here. So we're gonna feel that loss. One thing we've done, recognizing that outside of the art and cultural sector, is we've taken advantage of some of the legislative flexibility that the governor and the legislature provided to enable residents and taxpayers to delay their tax bills, their May 1st tax bills, to June 1st, to provide a little bit of relief, to waive some late fees and penalties where we can. And then we're looking, as we know, that through the stimulus that's been passed so far, Massachusetts will receive money through the Community Development Block Grant Program. Some communities get that directly. North Adams is what's called a mini entitlement community, so our funds come through the state. So we can't say how much funding we're going to see through that. But we're starting to talk with our Office of Community Development, with partners in the Franklin County CDC, who we've worked with a lot in the past and are fantastic around this, about what kind of relief we want to use those CDBG funds, those additional funds for. We'll have a public hearing and we'll have some conversation, but right now my thinking for an early commitment is that would be small business support to offset some of the impact that they're seeing. But this is going to be a knock for all of us. Mass MoCA had been experiencing some real momentum, really going back to the opening of Building 6 in 2017. And you look at the things that are part of the current Mass MoCA effect, or the momentum around the art and culture sector. That's Greylock Works, that's the tourists development, this cultural corridor between North Adams and Williamstown. It's what a local developer guy named Dave Morazy has done with what's called the NORAD Mill. And in just over 2 years, he filled that with 50 businesses, and they're continuing to operate as best they can. But it's gonna take some time to see how we really retrench and see that that momentum resume and accelerate.
I see. It's been estimated through the economic commissions, I think it was One Berkshire that said this, that North Adams receives about $52 million a year in related income to the arts.
Right. So that's that was actually a study by the Center for Creative Community Development, the C3D, and Steve Shepard at Williams College. Yeah, it's about a $52 million estimate of that's real and induced economic impact. So that's the money that's coming in, as well as what's recirculating through the community. A lot of that fueled by 250 to 300,000 visitors a year coming for the museum, coming for festivals. They're staying at porches, or they're staying at the Holiday Inn, or they're staying at Tourists or the New Williams Inn, or coming into the Berkshires and making North Adams a stop on a swing through the county. I think one of the great developments in this momentum that we're talking about is we're seeing more people who are making the northern Berkshires their base camp and maybe venturing down to Norman Rockwell or the Berkshire Museum or Jacob's Pillow, where 5-10 years ago somebody would have been based in South County and made their day trip up here. So we're starting to see that shift, and I'm optimistic that as we move into a recovery mode, we'll see that again. One of the other things that's important in thinking about how our creative sector is responding is that they're trying to find those ways and making those commitments to stay connected with their audiences. So you think about something like the Williamstown Theater Festival, which made the tough decision, and all of these decisions that these institutions are making are tough and painful and heartbreaking, just as they are for small businesses, for restaurants, for manufacturing businesses, for students and teachers in our schools who are having to respond to this and dealing with a really tough set of circumstances. But what I want to highlight is in the cultural sector, this way of staying connected. So Williamstown Theater Festival canceling their season, but moving to record their shows on Audible with the casts that they were going to bring to Williamstown. And I think that's a great model for those who can do something like that. We're also seeing that in the nonprofit sector, as organizations that would have had galas or annual meetings or festivals are finding ways to propose connection to their supporters, their patrons, their donors, the people that they serve in these remote ways. I mean, we're all getting, if not expert, we're getting practiced in interactions like the one you and I are sharing right now, where we're speaking, mediated by a computer screen and a camera. It doesn't have the warmth and the full personality of being, side to side in a room together. But we're learning to make do and still have, authentic connection. And you don't have to look any further than what people are doing, on Zoom and Facebook and making art, while they're in their home, to say that's just a vital part of the human spirit. And we're so fortunate here in North Adams with Mass MoCA and in the Berkshires to have institutions that are dedicated to nurturing that part of the human spirit day in and day out.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, Mayor Bernard, that's about all I have for you today, unless there's other things that you'd like to pass on to our viewers.
Again, I think it's the message that everyone has been passing on. It's do the tough work right now. Stay home, protect yourself, protect others. Wear your face covering when you go out. Seek medical support when you're not feeling well. That's what's going to get us through it. That's what's going to get us up on our feet as quickly as possible. But we're in for a tough road and a tough recovery. But I'm gonna close with what I said in my opening remarks. We've got a resiliency here in the Berkshires and in the North Berkshires and in North Adams in particular that will see us through, because we've done it before, and we'll do it this time because we're not afraid of the hard work, and we're not afraid of looking out for those in our community who have need, who are vulnerable, and who are feeling pressure at this time. So we will rise together again, and we will see each other publicly again as soon as we can. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you so much for your time. We are all eager to be back to normal, even if that normal is different than what the old normal was. The strength of all of us going through this together makes our community stronger. Until next time, stay safe and strong.